Okay, so you've already laser cut your LED light holder. I'm going to show you how to set it up for wiring. You'll have to select the color LED. Pay attention to what voltage your LEDs run on. Some are 2.2 and some are 3.2. You will need to set the voltage meters down by your desk to either 3.1 or 2.1 depending on what you're doing, and then you're going to check 10 LEDs. So you want to clip the red lead on the long one and touch the black lead to the short one and put those in a pile and go through testing 10 of those. We want to make sure we're not soldering any bad ones into the batch. So set those aside and then make sure they're returned. With your 10 set aside, you're going to put them in. The short side goes in the side of the circle with the line on it. That denotes the negative side. The long side is positive. So go ahead and snap all those into place. Be careful not to bend the leads over when you do this. Once those are all finished, flip it over and look at it end to end. You should see all the short ones, short leads on one side and all the long leads on the other. LEDs only work in one direction, so this is really important. You'll need two pieces of wire, about 6 inches long, one red, one black, black for negative and red for positive. So you just want to cut those. You can use the green mats to measure that out. So cut yourself two 6-inch pieces, and then we're going to strip back about 4 inches of that for soldering. The LED light holder is a little under 4 inches long, so a 4-inch piece will do it. Use the mat to measure out approximately 4 inches, and then with the blue handled strippers, use the 20 gauge stripper, the largest one on there, to strip back that 4 inches of wire. And this will be on the, this is a solid wire, this is not stranded. Make sure you're using the solid red and black wire for this, that's 20 gauge. Again, stripping back about 4 inches. Once that's been stripped, you want to make sure all your LEDs are pushed all the way down. The negative side, again, that's the short one. You're going to wrap the exposed wire on the bottom side of the board, and then you will take the leads, these are the short leads, should line up with the black one, and you're going to fold those over into the little grooves that you cut in the side. Once those are folded over, you can go ahead and do that with the red side. Again, those are the longer side. Try to make sure your wires are coming off on the same edge of the board, and go ahead and crimp those down. And then we'll just take a pair of pliers and tighten those crimpings. You kind of want to push the wire around the side when you do that. You'll see kind of from the end in a moment here, but crimp all those down. You want to see those are nice and flat. You can see there I'm kind of pushing the excess wire around. Anything that's still loose, tighten that back up so you have a good joint for soldering. When you look down at the edge, it should be nice and tight. At this point, you're ready to solder, so you need to get the soldering pencil turned on. I would turn it up all the way for this. The sponge needs to be wet so you can clean the tip. It's going to need to heat up for a couple minutes. I already had mine heated up. And then you're going to clean that on the sponge. You may need to do that during soldering just to keep the tip clean. You're going to use the soldering helping hands to put your board in. So use those little clips so you don't have to hold apart while you solder. You're going to get some rosin core solder, so take off maybe 8 or 9 inches here is all you're going to need. Make sure you wash your hands when you're finished, and don't eat anything until you wash your hands after using this. Once the soldering pen is hot, you're going to apply heat to the soldered joint. Once you get some heat on there, you're going to add in the solder and then pull the solder away and go. Once you've got a couple of these and you start to heat things up, you can really work your way right down the line here. And kind of just pull that solder along. You do want to make sure you're getting a nice bright solder joint. If it's dull, that typically means that it did not bond properly, but if it's good and shiny, you should be in good shape. So just solder all those connections as you go down. You can see I'm just kind of dragging that along so we don't overheat anything. And if you look like you missed something, head back and do that. At this point, the end of those leads, strip back maybe a 1/4 inch, and we're going to test your LED light board out, make sure all the soldering connections are good. You're going to set the voltmeter to the same or the power supply to the same voltage you did before, whether that was 3.1 or 2.1, and ensure that all lights come on. If one of them doesn't, it's probably in backwards or it's not soldered properly. We're going to prepare a USB cord at this point, so we're going to chop off the non-USB end. You have to be very careful. You're going to strip back about 2 inches here, the white sheathing. And I don't have strippers specifically for this, so cut into the sheathing very gently, and I don't mind helping you out with this. And then you can just pull back that white sheathing. You may end up with a black one. The black and red are your power. The blue and white are data cables. So you're going to chop those off at separate lengths so they don't touch each other. You're going to fold them back and cover that with a piece of 3/16 shrink tubing. So slide that shrink tubing over top of that, and then you will use the heat gun on setting 2. Let it heat up for 30 seconds or so, so that filament gets warm in there. And then move around when you're doing this. You can melt right through those wires if you're not careful. Don't blow this on your face. It gets up to about 1500 degrees, so you do want to be careful with the direction that that's pointing. Turn that off when you're finished. And then just take a look at your shrink tubing. That looks good. At this point, we're ready to solder the USB cable to the board, but we need to put a resistor in there. The LEDs run at a lower voltage than that. So the calculation for the 3 volts is a 10 ohm resistor. If you are using the 2.2, it's a 22 ohm resistor. We can go over that together. I've now stripped back 2 ends on that, and I'm going to solder my red leads together. That's the positive. Before I do that, I'm going to cut a short piece of shrink tubing and slip that over top of the wire. Make sure it's not going to be heated by the soldering pencil because it will shrink on you if you hit it. So crimp these together like a little hook on each one, pinch them together so you get a little physical connection there, and then with your soldering pencil you'll bring that in and make that solder joint. So add some heat to that with your soldering pencil, and then from the top side you can add in the solder. This will not take long, and give that a chance to cool before you try to pull that heat or that shrink tube back on top of there. On the other side, we're adding our resistor in. In this case, I use the white lights. I'm using a 10 ohm resistor, and I have 10 LEDs in parallel. So I've done the little hook and I've soldered that on. In this point in the video, I am cutting back a little bit on the black end of the wire so it's a little bit shorter because we're adding that added length of the LED or the resistor in. Make sure you put the shrink tube over top of that, and the shrink tube needs to be long enough to cover everything when you're finished. But I am simply soldering that on. You can see the shrink tube's already on there. Again, bring in the soldering pencil, heat it up, and then bring in the solder. Once those have cooled, you can slip the shrink tube over top of the soldered joint, and then we will once again use the heat gun. But before we do that, go ahead and test it. So grab an LED or grab a USB charger, plug that in, ensure that all of your connections are good, and if they are, then we'll go ahead and slide those heat shrink tubes back on top. These may not shrink all the way down on those really skinny wires, so just get them shrunk enough that they're going to stay in place so you don't have any contact along there. Once you have done that, you visually inspect all your wires. You want to plug that in one more time and check that, and then you are ready to assemble your LED light base.